Hey guys, I'm Maddie.
Hey guys, it's Chase.
And today we're going to be talking to you about outside resources for medical school. Let's get started.
So this video we're going to talk about a bunch of different resources. None of them are sponsored. We're not making any money off of these. We haven't talked to any of these companies about what we're going to say. So this is our true and honest opinion on this and what we really use as medical students. So at the start, there is like a general rule that I feel like medical students typically follow. That is, you should have 5 resources, no more than 5 resources total. This includes outside resources and in-class resources. So for example, if you decide to be a class goer and look at class PowerPoints, go into class is one resource, class PowerPoints is one resource. And you have 3 other resources that you can use. This could be first aid, which we'll go over later, question banks, flashcards, things like that. So just to start off in preference, you should have no more than 5 resources that you're going to be using.
We think that the #1 resource that you should be using is question banks. Question banks are where you're really going to get that consolidated knowledge and really put things together for your step 1 and your step 2. You would be surprised how much more you learn while doing question banks. It really consolidates things and makes things click.
Right, yeah, so you'll hear like 2 different trains of thought. Some people say you should do 5 to 10 questions a day, and then there's people who will do 40 to 80 questions a day. I mean, that's how much they love question banks. I'm on that, about 40, 50, 60 questions a day, and that's how I learn best. I love it, and I feel like that's given me the highest probability of doing well on steps.
For me, I kind of do a hybrid. So we're in systems-based curriculum. So we both try to knock out the curriculum in the first week or 2 and then do questions for the end of the system until our exam. So I will either do none or 5 to 10 questions a day during that period where I am learning the material, and then I'll be doing 40, 50 questions a day once I've finished all the material. So that way I'm really putting all that information together.
Right, so we just grind as hard as we can until we're done with whatever material that we want to go through, whatever resource that we choose to use for that unit.
So you have a pretty good number of question banks that you can choose from. For right now, Chase and I have actually chosen 2, just because Chase has been going through so many questions. I haven't finished one of them yet, but I still have it purchased. So you can choose from ScholarRx, Kaplan, Amboss, and UWorld. Those are your big 4. So Chase and I decided to go with ScholarRx. We actually purchased that our first year, I think it was first semester, and it is probably the easiest one. It really gets your feet wet, so that way if first year or first semester you're really getting an itch to do some questions or see what it's about, ScholarRx is the way to go. It is super easy to use, and it's kind of like your basic step questions. Sorry, that's our cat. I feel like the next step up is Kaplan. Chase and I do not use Kaplan.
Kaplan, I feel like most people refer to that as like the hardest question bank there is. It's harder than STEP really is. So I know like for people studying for the MCAT, sometimes they use harder questions than that's really going to be tested. Same concept here with STEP. Kaplan typically has harder questions that are actually tested. So if that's how you want to learn, prepare for the hardest to have it easier, then maybe Kaplan's the right fit for you. Building back off USMLE RX, I feel like a lot of people use that as like their burner bank. That's where they just get their first run through types of questions to kind of learn how questions are asked and what the layout of the test looks like.
The next one is Amboss, and that's the other one that we have purchased. We decided to purchase that at the very beginning of our second year because we knew that we were going to be finishing ScholarRx prior to Dedicated, like way prior to Dedicated, and we wanted another question bank to kind of fill that void. Amboss, we heard initially, was actually the hardest besides UWorld, which we'll get to in a second, but I love Amboss. It's my favorite QBank, actually, to be honest with you. It's really easy to use, super user-friendly. It has all sorts of cool features while you're actually doing the questions, and then while you're reviewing the questions. So after you answer a question, it has tutor mode, so it'll show you the answer, and it has an explanation for each, why that answer is correct, why all the other answers are incorrect, and then as you scroll down, all sorts of supplemental information. So information from first aid, information that they have, and information from the internet and like journal articles. So it really gives you almost too much information, but if you really don't understand a question, all of it will be right there and you really don't have to search for it. So that's awesome.
Right, and then Amboss lets you filter how hard you want the question. So does USMLE RX, but Amboss lets you filter it within 5 tiers, from 1 being the easiest and 5 being the hardest. So that's really nice, because questions that are on like the hardest level, level 5, those are so far like too hard for anyone to know. That's one that was like 15% correct rate. And then UWorld. Yeah, so UWorld is where a lot of med students differ. So some people will start using UWorld from year 1. Others will say UWorld for dedicated. We're on the dedicated train. We're just going to have that one question bank of UWorld that we're going to start during dedicated and finish before we take STEP. It has the most realistic questions. It has the greatest success rate, showing your predicted values.
The greatest correlation between percentage right on UWorld or a question bank and what your score will be on the actual exam.
Right. It's the most realistic.
Mm-hmm.
We would recommend waiting to start UWorld until your final semester or your final thread, whatever your university calls it.
Obviously, we haven't taken the exam yet, so we aren't living proof or anything, but from the people that we've talked to, from our advisors, pretty much mostly everybody, that's what they really recommend. So we think that the next most important resource that you should have is called first aid. Now, we started hearing about first aid before we even entered medical school. People would come and talk to our undergrad university and refer to first aid, and we had no idea what they were talking about. I thought they were talking about a literal first aid book, but they were talking about that book right there. Before we even get into it, we highly recommend getting it bound. So some people get it spiral bound. We just got it 3-hole punched with the spine cut off. This really helps. It's helped me, honestly, when I've been traveling back and forth to home during the pandemic, because I can just take a small section of the book, like we're in renal right now, so I can just take the 50 pages that's related to renal and take it home versus having to lug a 5-pound book around.
Right, so it comes like a traditional book with a spine, and you can just bring that to like Office Max, Staples.
Yeah.
And it's like $5 or $8. But we recommend doing it with hole punch, because then you can add like sheets of paper and then add that into a specific page if you know that something is important or not.
Yeah, like if you want to draw out glycolysis or something. I know I did that.
Yeah. Low yield. But yeah, first aid is a book that you should have on day 1 of med school. I don't think there's many other resources that you should have pre-lined up, but first aid is something you should have before you start med school.
If it is in first aid, it is high yield, basically. So everything in first aid is gold, which is kind of overwhelming because you need to fit that whole book in your head, but if you have that first day, you're going to be able to take notes alongside what they already have and just really be going over that information.
Right. First aid doesn't cover everything, but it covers about 70 to 80% of the material that you should know.
Yeah.
So basically, if you just know first aid, you should know 70 to 80% of the material. And I don't think that there's anybody who really understands every line of first aid. It is the densest book I have ever seen.
So this next resource, we both have a love-hate relationship with it. It's Anki. Now, we learned about Anki during our MCAT prep, which we'll likely talk about in another video, but Anki is a note card app that utilizes spaced repetition. And there are a lot of pre-made decks, note card decks, that you can download that go along with first aid and go along with a lot of these other outside resources that people have already created for you, which is amazing and saves you a lot of time. So basically what you do is you download this app onto your computer and your phone, and then you can download these pre-made decks and then slowly add cards into your own personal study deck. And then you can, if you get it right, you can push it out 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. And the more you get to know the card, the further it gets pushed out, and it keeps coming back. Spaced repetition, which has been proven to help you remember things.
Yeah, so I went back and forth on Anki. It really is my most used resource. I feel like I spend several hours a day on Anki. It does like kind of burn it into your brain, so I don't feel like you get the most deep understanding, but you definitely should remember it. And then only use pre-made cards. I've made only a few dozen cards over the last 2 years, year and a half. Every card you use should be a pre-made card. That will just help save you time, because making your own cards takes forever and it's not worth it. So there are 2 pre-made decks that most people use. That's going to be Lightyear and Zonky. I actually have both downloaded because I just choose whichever card I think fits what I want to unlock and put in my deck best. Some people will be very anal about choosing one deck, like just Lightyear or just Zonky.
I just use Lightyear.
Yeah, Maddie just uses Lightyear, and I think that works well for her. But you can download both. It's like 90-something thousand cards, like 90,000 note cards.
For both.
If you decide to go with both. I don't have all of those unlocked. I have like 20% or something unlocked, and that's it. There's a YouTuber called like Zonk King that if you want to understand how Anki works, we recommend going through that. Ank King. Not Zonk King. Ank King, yeah. So go with Ank King. He'll help you download it and get the right add-ons and everything for you.
Before you start using Anki, just know, I feel like Anki's kind of a cult. So when we came into medical school, everybody was telling us to use Anki. I already came in hating Anki because of my experience during the MCAT, and I did not want to use it, but I followed what everybody else said and really leaned on it. You need to know that you should use Anki however it's best for you, as with all of these resources. Just a warning, Anki compounds. So if you don't do your cards for a day, those cards get pushed to the next day and they add on top of each other instead of just like everything getting pushed back, they add. So like I stopped doing my Anki cards for a while, and I literally didn't do them over Thanksgiving break because I was so frustrated. And when I came back on that Saturday, I had like thousands of cards, which is just totally not okay. So just make sure that you're adding cards that are a manageable amount for you. So right now Chase is doing probably
350.
About, yeah, like max 350 cards a day. I'm doing about 200 cards a day. And the more cards you add, like the more cards you're gonna have for a couple of days, and then it'll spread out. So that's what I try to do. Chase will add all of his cards and just continue adding, and then his will spread out later. I try to add my cards more slowly, so that way I don't spend over half my day doing note cards.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the unit, I'll spend 7 or 8 hours just doing Anki cards, which burns my entire day, but that's what works for me, I guess.
Yeah. You can use Quizlet if you want to. A few people in our class do use Quizlet. You likely have to make your own cards, which is very time consuming, but if that's what works for you, that's awesome. Additionally, you do not have to use Anki. I spent a good amount of time not using Anki at all, and I did totally fine. The only reason I started using Anki again, and it's on a much smaller scale than I was doing originally, is because I'm watching more videos from outside resources, and those cards are already pre-made. So I just started adding those into a deck, and it just made my life a million times easier. And there is an add-on that Chase has that if you do need to skip a day, it will push all cards back.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of add-ons that you can add that make Anki a little bit less stressful.
Right. Anki is we sometimes love it, but most of the time hate it. But I think it's one of the best resources to have.
For sure.
So the third resource that I think we are going to recommend is Pathoma. Pathoma is actually a really cheap resource. I think it's like $100 for 2 years. So compared to other resources.
It comes with videos and stuff too, which is awesome. Like literally the words that are in the book are the same words that are on this guy's PowerPoint that he draws all over. So that's super helpful. So
I don't use Pathoma every day. I don't use Pathoma even every week. I use it very specifically. It's only pathology. So pathology, in my opinion, is one of the hardest parts of med school. So it's nothing but pathology in this book. And it's broken down by system or organ based. So that's really nice. So like if we're doing like cancer or cancer of the blood, then you can go and watch Cancer of the Blood, like an hour-long lecture, or like 5 lectures that add up to an hour long.
This was like for our immunology and hematology and oncology, this is what we relied on the most heavily. We haven't used it a lot since then,
right?
But it was super helpful.
Yeah, and they say, or students that have taken steps say that the first 3 chapters in Pathoma are like some of the highest yield material for step 1.
So I know that that's my goal, is to just get through the first 3 chapters of Pathoma and review that prior to step 1.
Right, yeah, so Pathoma has like 20 something chapters. Yeah, 19 chapters. So you can go through every organ if you want. I know a lot of people do. The first 3 are like a must do for step 1. And then I've done a few other chapters. I've done like 7 or 8 chapters out of it. And I think I'm pretty good there.
It's definitely bland.
It is the most boring book, I think, out of everything.
Yeah.
So the next lecture-based outside resource that we're going to talk about is Boards and Beyond. I know that most students, or at least a majority of students, will use Boards and Beyond. It's just a lecture-based website where they go through anything that could really be on step. And he correlates it to first aid, and it's a good resource. We really used it a lot during the first year. I've backed off of it, so has Maddie, because it's another resource that's just super bland. The guy just kind of has a monotone and just rambles about anything that could be involved in medicine in that organ. And to me, that just gets boring and I lose attention. And then also the Anki cards that are associated with it, that's where like the majority of the cards are. That
was my biggest problem with it. I think that was my biggest problem with Anki, honestly. My first year I was doing Boards and Beyond, which was already frustrating because it's a PowerPoint and he'll draw on the PowerPoint, but they're long and they have so many cards associated with them regardless of what deck you use. So you watch one video on one topic and you're adding 100 cards. And obviously you're not just watching one video per day. So that really adds up and it gets overwhelming really fast.
Yeah, but I know a lot of people use it. We used it. I don't know if I'd recommend it.
I think there's better resources out there, especially if you use class. I would just rely on class for that type of stuff and then rely on some of these other resources to really solidify it in your head, because that's not going to solidify it for you. So last but not least, our favorite resource is called Sketchy. And Sketchy is fantastic. If you've ever heard of a memory palace, that's exactly what Sketchy is. It is for... May I help you? Sorry about that. So it is a visual resource. So if you're a visual person, you need Sketchy. I'm very visual, and so I literally can just remember the picture and can remember most things about various diseases and ailments.
Yeah, so Sketchy is my favorite. I recommend it to everybody. It's mainly our go-to and only resource that we're using now. It has 3 sections. It has micro, pharmacology, and pathology. I think that covers pretty much everything, and then we use that to supplement some information out of first aid.
There's Anki decks associated with it, and that's super helpful because it'll ask a question in words, and then you flip the card over, see the answer, and then the decks will have screenshots of the videos in there, and you can see exactly what they're referring to, and it's super helpful.
Yeah, I would recommend Sketchy like in a heartbeat. It's my favorite thing if you are like a visual learner. If you are not a visual learner, like we have some people who are like, I can't look at a picture and remember it to save my life, then obviously Sketchy is not for you. There is another resource that we don't really use. It's called GoJan. It's an auditorial learning. It's just like an MP3 files.
He has a Spotify.
It's just a lecture from a very concise and consolidated professor who talks about step 1 information.
He explains it really well too. Like, I'll listen to it when, like I said, during the pandemic, I'm traveling back and forth to my house, which is 2.5 hours away, and back up here, and I'll listen to it in the car. I know Chase does the same thing, and he explains things so well, and even as somebody who is awful at auditory learning, I can imagine exactly what he's saying in my head and picture everything. So it's super helpful, just like even for somebody who's not an auditory learner.
And there is another resource that's kind of like Sketchy, but it's not Sketchy. It's Picturize. That's a really good resource. It kind of fills in the blank because Sketchy doesn't cover everything, unfortunately. I really wish they did, but they don't.
I feel like Picturize really shines in your biochem diseases. That's really helpful. I used to use it at the very beginning when we were in biochem.
Yeah.
And it's helpful. It's the same thing, same concept. They're a little bit shorter, actually.
They're a lot shorter. They're like 4 minutes.
Yeah, but they also are not as in-depth. So they don't usually go into drugs and stuff, whereas Sketchy, it's very elaborate. They use crazy things to help you remember. But at the same time, like, it's very helpful. But Picturize helps you get like those little weird diseases that we just kind of need to know a little bit about.
And then for Picturize, we use it for the vitamins. Vitamins are like kind of these questions that you'll get on step, and it will be like just straight point and shoot on if you know what this vitamin is, you get like a free point.
So we know that this video was based on medical school, but if you are in the application process for medical school, we do have a book on that, and that's linked in the description box down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We produce videos like this about every week, so look out for those, and we will see you next time.